Good morning, Bianca. You know the old campaign rule. If you can't win it, spin it. And last night, the candidates who didn't win the Gore endorsement were spinning it as unimportant. You know, New Hampshire often drives the primary pollsters nuts by coming up with an unexpected result. But this year, the pollsters were on the money. They predicted a big John Kerry win, and yesterday, he got one. The search for survivors will resume in the morning. But there is little optimism now that the 18 missing crew members will be found alive. This is Olympic speed skater Bonnie Blair's uniform, designed to the exact contours of her body, except there's a problem. Ms. Evans, what's that?
Oh, I think this head is too small. This is pre-made one, so I think I'm going to change it to bigger one.
Final touches are being made now.
Oh, this one fits better. Yeah, we're going to use this one.
Well, Gary Nuremberg talked with some Washingtonians who remember what it was like when segregation was the law of the land.
It was a hard struggle.
Joan Grant was born in this 13th Street home before discrimination was outlawed.
I can recall being able to shop in certain stores, but not try on hats.
Silver Spring in the early 60s.
They wouldn't serve me in a restaurant on East-West Highway.
He picketed was part of the national struggle to convince white politicians to pass the Civil Rights Act Lyndon Johnson signed 40 years ago tomorrow.
What that legislation did was really to fundamentally break the back of Americans' apartheid.
These past 4 decades in American life give witness to the power of good laws to prevent injustice.
President Bush invited civil rights leaders to the White House this afternoon, a gesture by a candidate who received only 8% of the African-American vote in 2000.
From a political standpoint, I'm sure that that he's thinking of the November election, and I know that the strategy of the Republicans is to siphon off a certain percentage of the African-American vote.
You're brought up to believe in democracy, but women weren't people. And
feminist author Betty Friedan helped lead the fight to include women in the bill.
Yes, 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 yes. It made a lot of difference. You know, it was no longer legal to discriminate in employment against women.
In 1960, women were only 3% of lawyers in the country, and today they are 10 times that number.
Jocelyn Samuels is a vice president of the National Women's Law Center who says problems remain.
Women still, on average, make only 77 cents for every dollar earned by men, and the statistics for women of color are even worse.
Carrie Dominguez, the Cuban-born chairman of the EEOC, told 9 News earlier today that there are emerging forms of discrimination.
And that wasn't the first time he actually escaped from that hut, was it?
His nephew, his cousin rather, said earlier today that 3 days prior to his rescue yesterday, he actually was able to get out of the hut and saw an American helicopter, tried to wave it down, but the helicopter didn't see him. He was in the desert, didn't have food or water, realized he was in dire straits, said he wasn't being treated that badly by his captors, so then went back to the hut, snuck back in, and says his captors never knew he was gone.
Gary Nuremberg on the inflammatory issue of inflammatory language.
Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Such language.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
The nation was stunned. Clark Gable saying that in Gone with the Wind, it's seen as a cultural watershed.
Did Dick Cheney do the right thing dropping the F-bomb? And did the Washington Post do the right thing dropping that F-bomb on your front porch?
Today's talk show buzz on WMAL's Michael Graham program was about remarks made by Vice President Cheney on the Senate floor Tuesday. He told Senator Patrick Leahy to F himself using the full obscenity. The Washington Post printed the remark in full in today's paper. No asterisks, the full word.
I'm sorry he said it, but I'm even more sorry that the Washington Post felt like they had to report it.
I finally told the Washington Post to go Cheney itself.
The Post has been more circumspect in the past, using repeatedly the phrase expletive deleted when describing foul language from Richard Nixon on the Watergate tapes in the early 70s. The Post declined 9 News requests for an on-camera interview, but issued a statement saying, quote, "In this instance, the word was used by the Vice President on the Senate floor in a public setting and in a purposeful way. Having all of the information before them, the readers can form their own opinions on the story. Standards change. Listen to Dan Rather last Sunday.
People thought you were an asshole." He did.
John Kerry was criticized for saying in a Rolling Stone interview that President Bush had effed up Iraq policy. Vice President Cheney told Fox News he has no regrets about his remark to Leahy.
He had challenged my integrity, and I didn't like that. But most of all, I didn't like the fact that after he'd done so, then he wanted to act like, everything's peaches and cream. And I informed him of my view of his conduct in no uncertain terms. And as I say, I felt better afterwards. I think a lot of my colleagues felt that what I'd said badly needed to be said, that it was long overdue.
Senator Leahy said simply, the vice president must have been having a bad day. This is tens of thousands of people in one place, the kind of gathering the FBI warned local law enforcement about earlier this week. Large gatherings that could be inviting targets for suicide bombers.
Where he's just spoken with Private Davis's family. Gary.
Leslie, the story of Private Brandon Davis is the story of a happy, always laughing boy who joined the Army and became a serious man who wanted to help the people of Iraq. Brandon Davis was killed Wednesday when his Humvee was struck by a roadside bomb near Fallujah, a long way from Cumberland, Maryland, where his death was front-page news.
When I first saw the picture in the paper this morning, it was really very touching. And it was, but it wasn't Brandon, because it was his picture in his uniform, and he was so somber and straight. And I thought, I got the yearbook from a couple years ago when he was in 10th grade and looked up his picture. And that was him, because he had this big smile on his face. And that was the Brandon that we knew here.
His mother agrees.
He was a clown. He loved to laugh and make people laugh.
But that began to change in the Army, especially after an attack 6 weeks ago where his sergeant was killed right next to him.
That took the wind out of his sails, and he knew it was getting bad then. And he told me, he said, Mom, he said, it's just by the grace of God that it wasn't me that time.
But this time, near Fallujah, it was.
He was a good person, a genuinely good person. And I'm glad he was my son.
Her son's body was returned to Dover Air Force Base earlier this afternoon. Well, good afternoon, JC. The president's remarks come only hours after the publication of those new photographs and after new calls for the resignation of Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. The Washington Post has new photographs showing American soldiers with detainees in an Iraq prison. President Bush came as close as he has yet to a formal apology.
I was sorry for the humiliation suffered by the Iraqi prisoners.
Some Democrats are calling for the resignation of Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld.
For the benefit of the United States, for our country, I believe Mr. Rumsfeld has to resign.
President Bush says no.
He's an important part of my cabinet, and he'll stay in my cabinet.
Only yesterday, the White House let it be known President Bush is upset Rumsfeld didn't keep him better informed about the prison abuse, fuel for presidential candidate John Kerry.
As president, I will not be the last to know what is going on in my command.
On Capitol Hill, the House Majority Leader is attacking Democrats who want Rumsfeld out.
Calling for Secretary Rumsfeld's resignation is as bad as saying the war is unwinnable. They want to win the White House more than they want to win the war.
And in addition to those John Kerry remarks, he said today that he called for the resignation of Rumsfeld last year. The secretary will surely face tough questions when he testifies about the scandal on Capitol Hill tomorrow. JC.
Gary Nuremberg reports the reasons for war are now described by the committee chairman as wrong and unsupportable.
Before the war, Congress needed convincing it was necessary.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
That was part of an intense Bush administration effort to convince Congress and the country Saddam was a real danger.
Well, today we know these assessments were wrong.
But at the time, Congress was convinced and authorized the invasion.
We in Congress would not have authorized that war if we knew what we know now.
Although the unanimous Senate committee report destroys much of the underpinning for war, President Bush says he welcomes it.
We need to know. I want to know. I want to know how to make the agencies better.
Some Democrats wanted an examination of whether the administration pushing hard for war pressured the intelligence community to come up with the answers it was looking for.
Committee's report fails to fully explain the environment of intense pressure.
Democratic Maryland Senator Barbara Mikulski is on the committee.
I believe that this is a clarion call for the reform of the intelligence community. And I believe we need new leadership. I believe we need a new framework. And I also think we need a new president.
There is a second phase of the investigation designed to look at whether the Bush administration pressured the intelligence community. Those images of Saddam in custody and under complete control were striking and were just what the administration wanted Iraqis to see. Saddam clearly no longer what Shakespeare wrote of Lear, I, every inch a king. Those descriptions of Saddam this morning are history.